presentation about the essential linkages, soybean poultry value chain, how to make chickens fly. Mr. Jake Walter, Country Director of Technocer Mozambique.
Thank you. Well, I think you can see already that I made a mistake, and I have it here May 24th, 2005. That's where we are today, isn't that right? Now, actually, I put that there for a reason, because what I wanted to get across with this presentation is, in fact, what needs to be done if you want to make the poultry soy link in the countries or in the places that you're working. And what really needs to be done is a very good study. And this is the study that we did back in 2005. And so I'm actually going to go through that study for you, and I think it'll explain to you the poultry soy link in Mozambique, and to some extent the poultry soy link generally. But you need to be aware that just because this is the case in Mozambique, it is not the case everywhere. I think one of the characteristics of business, maybe like varieties, is that it really depends on the environment you're in, and you really have to understand the details of that environment to get it right and make it work. And this was successful. I mean, I can start from the end and then go back to 2005. I mean, when we started, as you'll see, it was about a $20 million industry in Mozambique, domestic chickens production, and now it's over 150 million. And of course, a large portion of that, as you'll see, is soybeans. And it went from, in an economy that's growing quite fast in Mozambique at around 7–8% per year, poultry went from less than 1% of GDP to over 4% of GDP. And really, there was a bit of luck in there, which I'll explain to you later, but there was also a lot of doing the right thing, which you'll see came out of this presentation. And that's what I want you to understand, is that your strategy for making chickens fly depends upon having a really good understanding of the poultry industry and the dynamics of that industry in the country that you want to make this happen. So this is the presentation that we made. As you can see, I was there back in 2005. Jake was there, number one, and I introduced the team, and then the team went on and made the presentation, and you'll see that. Now it's 77 slides, so I'm going to go through it really quickly, and then I'll just comment, I think, on the important things as we go through. So don't worry about following every slide. Otherwise, I think as you'll see, it took 2.5 hours to do the original presentation, and I only have 20 minutes, so. Peter's over there. He's nodding, right? They called me actually this morning, or last night, I think, and said, "Do you realize you have 77 slides?" Okay. So this is the team, and this is actually in many ways the most important part. The second person down there, John Fung, was the team leader. He was a McKinsey engagement manager in Australia, from Chinese descent, obviously. He had never seen a live chicken. I'm not even sure he'd seen a whole dead chicken, and he certainly hadn't seen an ear of corn, or a soybean in his life. I mean, this is a city guy. You don't have to know about this stuff to do it right, but you do have to know how to analyze things. And John was a brilliant analyst and a very smart guy. In fact, the people at the Ministry of Agriculture, he also had a tendency to flicker his eyes when he was really thinking, so they called him Pentium 5. That was his nickname at the Ministry of Agriculture. But there is some expertise there in terms of processing, in terms of farming. And then Mike Davies at the end, the industry expert, he had just retired as the president of Cargill in Africa. So he really knew the industry very well. And the key insight that we got from him was that, because we had been trying to start an oilseed industry, frankly. We weren't interested in the poultry industry, we wanted oilseeds. And what he said to us was, oilseeds only work in Africa where you have a strong livestock industry, close by. And that's the same for cattle. It's the same for, different crops for different things. Soybeans for chickens, sunflowers for cattle, etc. So this is what I challenged them to do, was to look at that whole value chain and to decide how we should focus. And they decided to focus on chickens. They developed a plan. of how they would do that. And again, this is what comes from that McKinsey experience, is how do you organize the process. Miriam, the Mozambican woman, did the basics here. You got chickens, chicks, you got eggs, right? Market. Pretty simple stuff. A day-old chick. Feed. You grow the chickens. You process the chickens. Pretty simple technology here, right, for processing chickens. So day-old chicks are pretty capital intensive and pretty technology intensive. This tells you the basics of that. And this is the first, this is something I didn't realize. Many of you probably do realize it. But there's an awful lot of, the feed is really important and where the feed comes from. And it turns out, when you analyze it all, that not only is the feed really important for the chicken itself, as you'll see, it's also important for the baby chick, because you've got to feed the mothers of the baby chick. So feed goes all the way back through, not just in the chicken itself, but in raising the chick that you needed to make it. That's why, in fact, when you look at the numbers, I think the total, yeah, so the actual cost of a broiler, 74% is feed. And then of that, the total broiler cost, 37%, at least in Mozambique, is soy cake. And it's probably similar elsewhere. So we can see why chicken drives soybeans. In Mozambique, we also we export aluminum. And we actually export aluminum. We actually export energy in the form of aluminum. We have 80% of the value of aluminum is energy. And so the Brazilians, when they sell you a chicken, are actually exporting soybeans. So simple data, but actually difficult to get in Mozambique, and the team did a very good job. About 38 million chickens consumed a year. Of those, 17 million are roadrunners, and 21 million are produced commercially, and out of that, 3/4 were imported at the time that this study was done. So clearly this can have a big impact. Like I was saying, if you get it right, as we did in Mozambique, it ended up being, suddenly went forward. Anyway, about 4% of GDP. And this tells you what it takes for each million broilers. So if you look at the cost, can we be cost competitive? Well, the answer was, at that point, we certainly were not cost competitive. And in fact, the industry was losing market share very rapidly to Brazil. And Brazilian imports were pretty much flooding the Mozambican market. And to some extent, that's what we had to figure out how to fix. We could reduce the costs, looking at all of the different factors, sort of doing a benchmarking of all the different companies, and the most efficient that we could get, but still not as low as Brazil. However, with some margin, we could compete with imports because of the margins that the importers were selling at. Again, I'm not trying for you to understand all of the numbers. I know this is going very fast. Remember, I got 77 slides. But my point is to show you how much detail is necessary. Don't assume that you just create a book. It's easy to understand a chicken industry and get it right in terms of being competitive. So in the beginning, each country made its own chickens. And then people started trading chickens. And then Cargill got in the game, I guess, right? I'm not sure who got in the game first. America, I guess, got first. And then more south to south, Brazil. Chickens are expensive in Europe, production of chickens, largely because of social issues. Bird flu was an issue back then when we were doing this. And Brazil really took off, as we know. Tariff barriers are substantial, and they vary quite a lot. In Mozambique, it's about a 20% tariff on imported chickens, which is not particularly high, and it still is 20% right now. So it's not very protective. But what's interesting was that in Mozambique, you'll see in a minute, the chicken actually wasn't coming from Brazil, it was coming from Dubai. And it was chicken that was a year old, and it was past its sell-by date. And as a result, it was being dumped. So they weren't paying the 20% duty because it was coming in illegally because it was past the sell-by date. So it didn't pay the duty, and it didn't pay VAT. And so it was really an unlevel playing field for the domestic producer, in addition to Brazil having the cost advantage. So that was really, when we analyzed the thing in detail, that's what we found was that it wasn't really directly competing with Brazil. We were actually competing with Dubai. So you see, very little came from Brazil directly, went to the Middle East, and then if not purchased at a proper time, it came back to Durban and then ended up in Mozambique. So it looked like we would continue to get the leftovers, as they say. Now, there is a large live market in Mozambique, and that's likely to continue. You know, obviously that market is met entirely by Mozambican production. But our market share now has changed from about, as you saw, 20% of the commercially produced chickens. Now it's over 90% is produced domestically in Mozambique, and only 10% is imported. And that's actually good that some is still imported, because that's imported legally now. Part of what we did was get the industry organized, as you'll see here, and we got the rules actually enforced. We changed the rules a little bit to make them easier to enforce, and so that created the level playing field. And now Mozambique is pretty much the owner of its own market. So taking back our own market, that's where we are now. We're probably reaching the edge of that right now. We're going to have to start exporting pretty soon, both soybeans and chickens. And we think we are the low-cost producer in the region, so we expect to be able to compete regionally. There are non-tariff trade barriers that we'll have to deal with, but we think we can do that over time. So it's also important to understand, again, this is a McKinsey-type slide. My friend Simon Winter over there from McKinsey can confirm this, right? You know, you can see the various ways that you can do it. And we came up with a series of them. And the ones that we ended up with in the end are the government legislation, right? Requiring a bit higher quality and a level playing field. And we learned from the best. We have part of our model is based on the Brazilian model of having outgrowers, and also the U.S. to some extent, but mostly Brazil. And we did domestic branding. At the very end, I'll show you a video, a 30-second video, in addition to my 77 slides, which will show you how we promoted chickens. And it was very, very popular. We really created a lot of political will in favor of chickens, which was very, very important. The importers were quite powerful. The largest importer was the largest contributor to Frelimo, which is the ruling party in Mozambique. And so you can imagine the kind of difficulties that one comes up against. And very important, if you're going to do something that's really transformative, you're probably going to hurt somebody in the process. And you need to understand ahead of time who that is and what's your political strategy, your advocacy strategy to be able to beat. Thanks for the 5-minute slide there. So reducing cost is important. We did it in a number of ways. The broiler and the chick, we were able to get down. We did have some tariffs, and obviously transport we didn't have as much, at least for much of Mozambique. And the price of soy cake, we expect will start going down now that we're about to export soy cake. Understanding scale was really important, and again, understanding the Brazilian model, the Thai model, the American model, the European model, all those were important benchmarking for us. Perceived quality, again, in a minute you'll see the difference then was very small, what people would pay for a domestic chicken versus an imported chicken, even though they felt it was better. So the advertising helped reinforce that. Another thing we found was it was very important to be integrated. In this bad situation that was created with the competition with Brazil, the ones that were not fully vertically integrated were fighting with one another, whereas if they were fully integrated, they had more flexibility to be able to compete in a difficult situation. And they didn't see themselves competing with each other as much as they saw competing with Brazil as being the major issue. So consumption increasing. Gonna have to go quicker here. It's an example of how we lowered the price of chicks. This was the basic problem because of the imports and why we had to fix the import issue and get a level playing field. And then creating the industry group. Very important to get organized, politically organized, and we did that successfully. Even though when we arrived they were fighting with each other, we managed to get them together and actually become quite a powerful force in Mozambique. So animal health regulations, promoting competition, branding, market relations, and then that was the basic strategy. And then also the last thing you're going to see is, there's the industry association. And the last thing we did was outgrowers. We basically copied the Brazilian model, but on a smaller scale. We started with about 1,000 chicks per cycle with outgrowers, and now the industry is averaging around 3,000 to 5,000 per cycle, and growing all the time, increasing. And very, very efficient, very competitive in terms of mortality and feed conversion with the rest of the world. Almost, am I done? 2 minutes? Okay. So you can see we started very simple, but every single one of these people that started back then with maybe 500 to 1,000 chicks per cycle now has much better barns, much more competitive, and making very good money. But the real key was not so much those, it's maybe 1,000 or 2,000 of those smallholder outgrowers. The real key was the soy and maize producers. There's 2 million maize producers in Mozambique, and there's now 30 to 40,000 soybean producers, which didn't exist at the time that this was made. So I did it. Now, 30 seconds, I have to watch the video, huh? Great.
Quem quer jantar a galinha que é importada, que vem fechadinha, você não vê nada. É seca e magrinha, vem cheia de ar.
Afasta magricela, você só tem costela. Galinha bem mimada, foi muito bem tratada. Quem gosta de galinha, só nacional que é minha. O frango nacional é melhor.
We actually got the spot at the first national dance competition, like the idol. It was the idol for dancing, and we were the major advertiser at that event. And so having that dance, you can imagine how exciting that was. You know, people were watching for the first time, and Mozambicans love to dance. Well, I guess we all love to dance. But you can imagine, you know, that impact was terrific. And it's interesting. I did a thing at a business school once, and a few years after that, and nobody had heard of TechnoServe, but they had all heard about the Nacional chicken. So it was advertising is very powerful. So keep that in your plans. If it fits, it's worth the investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. It was actually impressive to give a McKinsey-style presentation and fast forward in less than 20 minutes. Question?
Yeah, Fawzi Hashim again at the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. Actually, I assume that the poultry litter that is produced is applied to the soil.
It's what?
Applied to croplands, whether soybean or others, to the soil.
Oh, the litter. Yes, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it is used. In fact, the company that does the outgrowing, well, at least several of them, teach their outgrowers to do horticulture and grow crops that they couldn't grow before now that they have the litter.
Oh, the question is, if this litter is composted before being applied to the soil?
Yes, I think so. I'm not an agronomist, but I think they've told me that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The FAO data shows that still Mozambique is importing about 48,000 tons of soybean cake in the country. From where are they importing that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
And this shows that still, soybean is in high demand in Mozambique. And I know that there are some processors also there, but supply is the issue. So from where do they get that import, and how is it the cost related to what they can produce in country?
Right. Yeah, it's imported from Argentina, and it's increasingly less though. The production in Mozambique is growing at about 50% per year. So it's reached around about 40,000 tons now of local production over the last 5 to 6 years. So it started at a very small base and now is up. So we actually expect in the center and north of the country that all of the poultry production will be fed with Mozambican soy. And in the south, still the port is very efficient. You know, the Maputo port, it's right at the port. And so the availability from Argentina is good and the roads are not that good. So it's not clear whether the northern soy will be able to compete with the imported soy in the far south of the country where about half the chickens are raised. But I think they will. The profitability is still quite good for soy for the smallholders and for the larger farmers in the north. But we'll see, how it pans out. But I think we should be able to meet domestic demand. And even if we don't meet domestic demand, we're relatively competitive in soy, so we can export. All of the major large farms that are producing soy, there's about 4 of them, 4 or 5 commercial farms, maybe each 1 to 2,000 hectares. They're all looking towards the export market. They're very happy that they had the domestic market for the chicken industry to begin with, because it reduced their risk when they came in to invest in the first place. They didn't have to worry about marketing as much. But they've all had in their mind that at some point they would be saturating the poultry market in Mozambique itself in terms of soy and would have to start exporting. And actually that'll be good for the poultry industry, because then the clearing price of soy should go down as they start exporting. So as long as we're profitable for the farmer will continue to produce and produce more, and yet still be selling soybean at a lower price. And that'll make the poultry industry more competitive, and I think it'll also open the opportunity for other domestic uses like the meat substitutes and so on that we were talking about earlier.
Hi, Michael Cullen from Aware. Jake, I wonder what you could tell us about the sort of the profile of the farmers with that kind of increase in production year by year. Who's producing? You just mentioned some large-scale farmers, but they're not the whole picture. In terms of, you mentioned the profitability seems to be there, but what are they producing or not producing as they're going to soy? What are they giving up? What's that picture look like?
Yeah, I would think for those that don't increase the amount they're planting, the amount of area they're planting, they're probably substituting it for another bean that they were growing, and this is a more profitable bean, and they're looking at it to some extent as a bit more cash income. So those families that stay with their very small holding and aren't increasing any labor, they're not buying any output, any labor from other sources. For them, it's probably just a little bit more cash and a little bit more profitability that they're looking for in general. But a lot of people are expanding. The network that we've set up to multiply soybeans and also to sell soybeans and inoculant and so on to their neighbors, we are also outfitting them with tractors and threshers so they can mechanize the soy, both at land preparation and at threshing. And then you can go to a larger average. So as the soybean industry has grown from 3,000 or 4,000 producers to almost 40,000 producers over the last 5 years, the average size has also grown. And those are still mostly smallholders, so there are a few large commercial farms. There's a lot of talk about Brazilians coming in and investing in Mozambique with large-scale farms, others. It's not happening that fast at this point. There's issues about the land law. There's issues about the actual availability of large tracts of land. There's social concerns. I think the government has done a bad job of selling that strategy. And so they've got a lot of pushback from civil society. I think it'll eventually happen. We think it can happen in an integrated way, and we have a model for how that could be done. I don't need to get into it here, but I would say it's, like I was saying earlier, it's a combination of, unless you want me to get into it, I don't know. Would you? Okay. What we're doing is that these networks of seed multipliers that I was talking about that become essentially commercial extension agents with tractor services, with threshers, with seeds, with inoculant, et cetera, on a commercial basis to their smallholder neighbors. What we're suggesting to large investors that come in to do 1, 2, 3, 5,000, 10,000 hectares, whatever they think they can do, is that they kind of partner with these seed multipliers to create this service to all smallholders for better technology. Because the network themselves, these technology providers at the small scale, they need new input in terms of technology and ideas and so on as well. And so that can be the corporate social responsibility sort of element of a larger investor so that they're integrated into the community. And again, those medium-sized people are leaders in their community. And so they can influence the community and say, look, these guys are okay, we're working it out in this way, you're going to share with the benefits in that way, and they can actually help facilitate the land consultation process, which is required by Mozambican law, where the community has to agree that when investments are made. So if they're well prepared, we think investors can actually improve the process and contribute to smallholder development as well as their own investments. And we're lucky that Mozambique has quite a lot of land still to be developed. Not the case in many other countries.
Yeah. Hey, Jake. Pete Goldsmith, University of Illinois. Can you describe a little bit about the supply chain in terms of inputs for the poultry producers, antibiotics, vet med, micronutrients, pullets, just all the genetics?
Yeah. As I said, now the tendency is towards either doing it yourself, so investors that come in and have their own commercial poultry production with employees, or outgrowers. I'd say those are the two growing models. There is still the road runners, but that's not particularly growing. I think that's just sort of maybe a little bit growing because people have a little bit more wealth, and when you have wealth, you get more chickens. In fact, they did a survey of happiness, in Mozambique, and the biggest correlation was between happiness and having chickens, more chickens. So, it's a good thing. So it's probably increasing some because the country seems to be happy. but I'd say that it's mostly outgrowers, and the outgrowers, they get everything from the mother company. And an outgrower typically, in some cases, doesn't even have their own commercial production at all. Maybe a few houses just to keep track of how feed is doing themselves, so they know how good they're doing with feed, whether there's any problems with the feed, and also just to understand the efficiencies. But their best outgrowers are better than they are, for sure. And they're moving those outgrowers better and better all the time. And those outgrowers are small. They're relatively small, and they get everything from the company. In fact, the best company in the country pays the way the Brazilians do, which is you don't even pay for your feed and your chicks and everything like that. You're just paid based on a formula that reflects your feed conversion ratio and your mortality. And that's it. So you're really doing a job. In some sense, you're not really a trader. You don't have to worry about chicken prices. You don't have to worry about soybean prices. You don't have to worry about anything except taking care of the chicks and raising them properly. Did that answer the question?
And Jake, this is Suzanne Poland from USAID.
Hey,
Hi,
Suzanne.
Jake.
A fellow Mozambican.
Kind of follow on to a number of these questions here. I think earlier today we were talking about the problem of foundation seeds and getting even breeder seed out, and that still remains a big problem in Mozambique. And they're currently looking at how can they scale up some of the things, such as soy production, and the lab is going to be involved in that. So,
right.
Could you give us an idea of what TechnoServe and your partners had to do in terms of solving that seed problem, and what you think the lab could be doing for you to increase the availability of the seeds?
Right. Well, we've been very fortunate. I've told several people here that the IITA group in Mozambique, I think, is particularly good. Steve Bowen and his team are really good, and we've had a great relationship with them from the beginning. And so that's worked out well. They've tested existing varieties. They've tested new varieties. They've released some new varieties. Farmers are quite excited about it. So there's this, several varieties every year coming through, and that really, I think, helps everybody. It helps the existing farmers and the new farmers, it's working pretty well. It takes a little longer than one would want. We're always complaining it's not fast enough, but it has increased in pace some. And I think that looking to the future, I'm very optimistic. With this, we have about 150 of these seed multipliers now, smallholder seed multipliers that are producing, quality certified seed. Soy only so far, but we're now starting with other crops. They're going to be the advocacy group. They're going to be organized, and they're capable, and they're smart, and their business depends on this. So I believe they're going to be the ones that's telling the government, you're not getting this done fast enough, or this rule doesn't make sense, or there really are very few. You've been in Mozambique, Suzanne. There's very few organizations that really speak for smallholders in the country with any kind of capability. And the few that do exist have been co-opted by the central government. And we actually think this group of seed multipliers, because their success depends on the success of the smallholders around them, will actually speak for all of them as a group and be effective spokespeople. So it'll be obviously particularly on seeds because that's their business. But I think it's going to be even broader than that.
David Chikoe, IITA, Zambia. It's a contribution to what you just said.
some of the efforts we are doing actually to improve seeds in Mozambique, one is to enhance the capacity of the seed testing unit. Apparently, a couple of years ago, when there was no official release variety, what we found was that the seeds unit did not even have the basic regulations in place. They were actually using common bean standards. So we have been working with them to make sure that there is improvement in their capacity to certify seeds. But then we are aware that they actually got a challenge in terms of the staffing. So essentially what the seed unit has been doing is working with NGOs and some groups in the provinces and then training these people as para-inspectors. So this is the way actually they are able to reach to the large country. You know that Mozambique is actually quite big. We as IITA, we are producing small quantities of foundation seed, which then we sell through NGOs and small seed companies to make sure that the pipeline is functioning. Then in the communities, again, there's been it's already been said that, you know, that the road network in Mozambique is quite poor. So what actually we are trying to do to enhance seed production is to work through community-based seed enterprises, so that actually these communities, they produce seeds and then sell it to the neighbors. That way you actually cut on the transport costs. But then these community seed enterprises are also linked very much to the certification system. And also in certain places, they could also be linked to the private sector, so that they produce, then the small seed companies actually become the marketing channel to make sure that the seed gets out. So I think these are some of the activities we are doing on the part of IITA. Thank you.